I am sure that God keeps no one waiting unless he sees that it is good for him to wait. C.S.Lewis, Mere Christianity. We live in a world where immediacy is often equated with success. We want answers now, solutions yesterday, and blessings on demand. But God's timing operates on a different plane, one where delays serve a greater purpose. Even when it feels unbearable, you may be praying for something fervently, and yet, there is no sign of an answer. You may be walking through darkness, searching for light, and wondering why God seems to be withholding it. But as C.S. Lewis reminds us, God's delays are not denials. There is a reason for the waiting. Consider the metaphor of a ship, a vessel crafted to navigate the seas, ready for storms and distant horizons. But what happens when the wind dies down, the stars disappear, and the ship drifts aimlessly? It feels lost, abandoned, forgotten. Yet, the ship is not alone. In the same way, God is with you in your waiting. He is guiding you, even when it seems like you are drifting. Your waiting is not in vain. Trust that God is working in the unseen, preparing something greater than you could ever imagine. What you perceive as delay may very well be God's way of teaching you patience, resilience, and deeper faith. Life often feels like a chaotic mess of events, each thread seemingly unrelated to the next. But imagine that what we see is only the underside of a grand tapestry, where the design is hidden from our view. In the same way that a tapestry is woven from seemingly disconnected threads, so too are the events of our lives. From our limited perspective, it can feel like a confusing tangle, a mess of heartache, disappointment, and frustration. Yet, we must remember that we are only seeing part of the picture. God is the master weaver, threading each moment of our lives with precision. Just because we can't yet see the full design doesn't mean there isn't one. Our job is to trust in the weaver's skill, to believe that every thread, every trial, every joy, every sorrow, is part of something much bigger than we can comprehend. We are not meant to understand the entire design while it is being woven. Scripture reminds us, "For we know in part, and we prophesy in part, but when completeness comes, what is in part disappears." 1 Corinthians 13 verses 9 to 10. There is a mystery in God's work, but it is not a void. It is a masterpiece in progress, and we are invited to trust in His greater plan. One of the most profound biblical examples of how God works through suffering is the story of Joseph. Betrayed by his brothers, sold into slavery, falsely accused, and unjustly imprisoned, Joseph's life seemed to be a series of senseless tragedies. From his perspective, it would have been easy to question God's goodness, to ask, "Why me, Lord?" And yet, through it all, God was working. Each painful chapter of Joseph's life was leading him to a place where he would not only be restored but elevated to a position of power that allowed him to save his family, and a nation, from famine. What seemed like random, cruel events were actually stepping stones in God's plan to redeem not just Joseph but countless others. In Genesis 50 verse 20, Joseph tells his brothers, "You meant it for evil, but God meant it for good." This profound truth applies to our lives as well. What may feel like evil, like a senseless series of misfortunes, is actually part of God's redemptive plan. In the midst of your suffering, remember Joseph. God is using your pain to accomplish something greater, even if you can't see it right now. Trust that your trials are threads in the tapestry of redemption. Job's story is another powerful testament to faith in the face of the unknown. In a matter of moments, Job lost everything: his wealth, his children, his health. From the outside, it made no sense. Job's friends tried to explain it away, offering simplistic answers for why he was suffering, but Job knew their explanations fell short. Job's response to his suffering was to bring his pain and confusion directly to God. And though God did not provide detailed explanations for Job's suffering, He offered something far greater, a revelation of His sovereignty and majesty. God's response to Job was not an answer to the why of his pain but an invitation to trust in the one who knows all things, even when we don't. Job learned that faith doesn't always come with answers. Sometimes, it comes with a deeper trust in God's character. In our own lives, we often seek explanations for our suffering, hoping that understanding will bring peace. But more often than not, God calls us to trust Him without full knowledge of His plans. It is through this trust that we find peace, not in the answers but in the presence of the one who holds our lives in His hands. Ruth's story is one of loss and uncertainty, but it is also one of profound faith. After the death of her husband, Ruth chose to follow her mother-in-law Naomi back to Bethlehem, stepping into an unknown future. Her decision was an act of faith. Where you go, I will go, your people will be my people, and your God my God. Ruth 1 verse 16. Ruth could not have known the full impact of that decision. From the outside, it seemed small, even inconsequential. But in God's hands, Ruth's faithfulness led her to become part of the lineage of Jesus Christ. Ruth's story reminds us that even when we can't see the bigger picture, our small acts of faith are woven into God's larger story of redemption. You may not know where your next step will lead, but like Ruth, you can trust that God is guiding you toward a purpose greater than you can imagine. In the darkest moment of history, the crucifixion of Jesus, God was working a plan of redemption that would change everything. What looked like the ultimate defeat, God's own Son suffering and dying, became the greatest victory when Jesus rose from the dead. The resurrection is the ultimate demonstration of God's power to bring life from death, hope from despair, and redemption from brokenness. In your own life, you may feel as though you are surrounded by ashes, but take heart. The same power that raised Jesus from the dead is at work in you, turning your mourning into dancing and your pain into joy. No matter what you have lost or how deeply you have been hurt, God promises to bring beauty from your brokenness. He is the God of resurrection, and He is making all things new. One of the most challenging aspects of faith is trusting God's timing. We live in a world that values speed and efficiency, but God is not in a hurry. He is doing something eternal. And eternal work takes time. In Ecclesiastes 3 verse 11, we are reminded that He has made everything beautiful in its time. There is a season for everything, and God knows the perfect timing for each moment of our lives. Though it may feel like you are running late for a miracle, know that God's timing is always perfect. Like a seed planted deep in the soil, growth often happens in the hidden places. The seed may seem dormant, but beneath the surface, transformation is taking place. In your own life, trust that God is nurturing your growth, even when it feels like nothing is happening. Faith requires patience, but it also requires trust that God is faithful to complete the work He has begun in you. He will bring you to the harvest in His perfect time. As we come to the end of this journey, I want to leave you with a profound truth. When God doesn't make sense, it's not because He is absent or indifferent. It's because He is doing something far beyond our comprehension. God is not confined by time or space. He is weaving an eternal masterpiece that will one day be revealed in all its glory. You may find yourself in a season of waiting, of darkness, of confusion, but take heart, God is at work. He sees you, He loves you, and He is guiding you toward a future full of hope. Embrace the mystery of God's ways. Choose to trust Him, not because you understand everything He is doing but because you know that He is good. As C.S.Lewis once said, the great thing, if one can, is to stop regarding all the unpleasant things as interruptions of one's own, or real, life. The truth is, of course, that what one calls the interruptions are precisely one's real life. God is at work in the interrupt-ions, the waiting, the uncertainty. Trust Him with your story, and know that He is faithful to complete the beautiful work He has begun in you.